let's try to make some more observations using these economic measures and our case study countries. And so what I've done here is I've sorted our case study countries based on GDP from highest to lowest. And once again, what the different colors on the right-hand side, as we go forward, whenever anything is green means it's the highest value for a particular variable. In this case, the variable is GDP. And if it's red, that means it's the lowest variable, the lowest number for that particular variable. Now we have the IMF. Fortunately, that mapped out this pattern for the entire world. So this is a choropleth map, and we can see on the bottom left-hand side, places that are the burnt orange or the dark orange are places that have the highest or the largest GDP total, whereas places that are green have the lowest GDP total. And we'll just go ahead and we'll just use this kind of as an example. Go ahead to look at the country in Africa called Nigeria. In this country called Nigeria, you'll see it being dark orange. And that's one of these situations where it's a bit of a skewed number. What that is saying is they're making a lot of money and they're producing a lot of stuff, in particular resources, in particular oil. And so they're essentially producing a ton, billions of dollars of a particular resource. However, there's a ton of people in Nigeria. And so what this is making it seem like the country of Nigeria is doing quite well. However, if we think about it per capita, as this map here now shows as GDP per capita, we see Nigeria no longer is that our top tier, number one, high producing, huge GDP country. Instead, it's actually, when we think about the population, which Nigeria has a very, very, very high population density, now it's a little bit more reflective. And so now we see Australia stands out more now compared to a lot of these countries that are very, very, very densely populated, like China, like India, like Nigeria. And so GDP per capita, we can see how that is a more useful measure because it accounts for population size. So now I've sorted our case study countries based on GDP per capita. And now we can see how United States is clearly at the top, where China now falls more to the middle. And so China has a ton of people, and so their GDP, we have to kind of keep that in mind. So now what I've also done is I've added the DTM stage, the Demographic Transition Model stage, that we have identified for these countries all the way back in a previous chapter. So I just carry that same number on over here. And what do you know? A clear pattern is observed. And so we see states and countries with higher GDP per capitas have more correlation with being a stage 4 country. Countries there in the middle, Brazil, China, Egypt, India, are kind of those transitioning countries. They're kind of transitioning. They're definitely stage 3. Maybe in the case of Kenya and India, they're early entry countries into stage 3, whereas you have with Brazil and China, maybe they're exiting stage 3. But nonetheless, they're very much our middle income countries. Whereas at the bottom, we can see our stage 2 countries. Quintessential Afghanistan and Haiti have the lowest GDP per capita. So once again, something I've already observed. As you increase wealth, you typically also increase in terms of demographic transition model, in terms of increasing your stage number. And so we see that transition also relating to economics. But now when we look at GDP growth, that middle variable there in the middle column, we can see that actually our lower income or our stage 2 countries, or even our middle income countries, are the ones that have the highest GDP growths. And so our stage 2, stage 3 countries have on average higher GDP growths than our stage 4 countries, our high developed or wealthier countries. So why is this the case? Well, first off, one reason is you look at a lot of these poorer countries, they've got more room to grow. So where the United States, Germany, and Italy, we've created over time this huge economy, this quite diverse economy. It's hard for us to have huge increases from one year to the next, whereas in a lot of these poorer countries where there isn't much to begin with, it's easier to have these increases. It's easier to have this GDP growth. Further, a lot of these different countries, what's happening is you get a lot of resources, and so a lot of them are rich or gaining wealth because of the demand for resources. And they've got the resources, they've got the oil, they've got the minerals, they've got the agriculture, they got whatever that people want. And so they're growing because they're very much resource-based countries in which they've got a resource in which people across the world want it. Further, you could also say that in a lot of these countries, they might be seeing particular times of peace. So oftentimes peace in the end of war brings some stability, which causes economic growth. And so in some of these countries, this peacetime is helping to create this economic growth. Other situations, now this doesn't happen all the time, but sometimes a population boom or a baby boom can generate economic growth, so essentially more people working, more people consuming stuff, more people buying stuff, but that isn't always the case, but sometimes that is. Finally, sometimes countries are they all of a sudden catch fire. They all of a sudden, the Pacers, Paul George, I remember back in the day, he sometimes would just catch fire, just be on fire, would never miss a shot. So sometimes countries just get lucky. So that might also be what we're seeing as well. Now we have GDP growth mapped out by the IMF across the world. And so here's almost the opposite of what we saw beforehand regarding GDP per capita or overall GDP. And so the countries that have the biggest GDPs are actually the ones that aren't really growing that much. So what's happening is in a lot of African countries, a lot of Asian countries, Southeast Asia, East Asia, South Central Asia, Latin America, in particular Central and South America, you can see how the GDP of the countries are growing, and a lot of this is resources is the big thing. Resources that are actually being used or manufactured in a lot of those green countries. So this is helping to understand some differences that we see in terms of the economies across the world. Other general patterns that are observed between our case study countries is in terms of the types of jobs or types of industries that dominate in terms of their overall GDP. And so we look at these different types. We got agriculture, industry, manufacturing, and services. And first off, Haiti, no data, and so I don't know why, but it could be argued the country is in such disarray and chaos that the data just wasn't collected or couldn't be collected and couldn't be accurate. But we look at some of the patterns that we see here. So you look at agriculture. On average, lower income or stage 2 countries are where we see a higher percentage of GDP coming from agriculture. We look at more of those middle income countries like Brazil, China, Egypt, India, those kind of stage 3 countries that are either transitioning in or out of stage 3. We can see they have a higher percentage there in industry and manufacturing. Whereas we get to our stage 4 countries, they have a higher percentage of their GDP, of their overall wealth, let's say, coming in or comprised from services. And our final way in which we can look and make observations about our case studies, countries, but also different income levels in terms of different economic measures is exports and imports. And so exports of goods and services as a percentage of the GDP is our first column. Second column is imports of goods and services as a percentage of the overall GDP. And then the third column is essentially exports minus imports. And so are you sending off, are you selling more stuff, or are you buying more stuff from abroad? And so we can see on average our stage 4 countries are essentially making more stuff that's being exported than that they're importing in. Whereas our poor countries, or our stage 2 countries, have more stuff in which they're buying from other countries than what they're actually sending to other countries. They're exporting abroad. So this is a general idea. Moral of the story here is countries that manufacture stuff or make stuff are obviously going to be more likely to export stuff, whereas people in countries that don't manufacture anything, for example, Afghanistan, Haiti, Kenya, not a lot of manufacturing there, and so they have to import a lot of products, or import a lot of goods and services to other particular countries. And here we have a map at the global level that shows imports versus exports. You see, particularly there in Europe, they are exporting a lot of stuff. They're manufacturing a lot of stuff abroad. Also there in Northern America, you can also see that as well, particularly Canada and Mexico, in which they're exporting a huge amount of their overall GDP, which for the most part is mirrored by countries in terms of imports. And so countries that import a lot of products and goods and services from abroad. So you see a lot of overlap, a lot of similarities between countries that are exporting a lot, but also countries that are importing a lot. Places where you don't see any of this, of course, is where manufacturing really isn't occurring. So you see that South Central Asia, you see that in Africa, parts of Latin America and the Caribbean, parts of Oceania. You're not seeing a lot of manufacturing there. So because of that, you're seeing not a lot of exports and imports of different goods and services.